Welcome to the deep dive. We're so glad you're joining us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here.
Sometimes the most straightforward, uh, seemingly dry historical documents can secretly contain the most dramatic stories.
Oh, completely.
You might think a simple list of names and dates is just data, but when you look closely, you find this hidden narrative of ambition, ideological tectonic shifts, and just the absolute chaos of history unfolding in real time.
Yeah, it really is wild when you start unpacking it.
Today, we're looking at a source that perfectly embodies this. It's the Wikipedia article detailing the list of United States senators from South Carolina.
Right, which, I mean, it looks like a standard reference table on the surface, just rows and columns. But when we dig into the timeline, it becomes this incredible mirror reflecting the entire American political experiment row by row.
Exactly. So our mission for this deep dive is to look past those dry tables and extract the turbulent, fascinating political history of a state that has been at the absolute center of American political evolution.
For a very long time.
Yeah. We are talking about a state that has been putting people in these seats since it ratified the Constitution on, let me check the exact date, May 23, 1788.
That's right.
But before we get into the timeline itself, we need to set some ground rules for how we are going to look at this source material today.
Yeah, a mandatory disclaimer is definitely crucial here because this historical list covers deeply polarizing eras.
Very polarizing.
We are going to be looking at multiple political parties, massive ideological shifts involving both left-wing and right-wing movements, and actions that literally tore the country apart. So I want to be entirely clear with you, we are not endorsing any of the viewpoints, parties, or actions of the historical figures we are going to discuss today.
Right, we're just looking at the document.
Exactly. Our goal is to impartially report the facts exactly as they are provided in our source material. We are simply tracing the evolution of these two specific Senate seats to understand the mechanics of our political history.
Perfect. So we're treating this as an architectural blueprint of history. I want you to imagine the United States Senate as a stage. South Carolina gets two specific roles on this stage, known as Class 2 and Class 3. And these roles have been recast over and over across the centuries. But looking at the source, these two classes don't operate on the same timeline. Why are they split up like this?
So that class system is actually a brilliant structural rhythm built right into the Senate. The Constitution divides senators into three classes so that only about 1/3 of the Senate is up for election every 2 years.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, it prevents the entire chamber from turning over all at once. It ensures institutional memory.
Which means, from the perspective of a voter in South Carolina, you are never voting for both of your senators in the exact same year.
Right.
Unless there is some sort of special election to fill a vacancy or something.
Precisely. It forces a staggered pulse of Democratic input. For South Carolina, the Class 2 seat is on an electoral cycle. That means it will next be up for election in 2026. And the Class 3 seat is on a cycle that puts its next election in 2028. So you get this continuous alternating rhythm of elections that keeps the state constantly engaged with the federal government.
It is a heartbeat that started all the way back in 1789. So let's look at the very first faces to hold these roles.
Let's do it.
Looking at the table for the Class 2 seat, the very first name is Pierce Butler. And under the party column, it just says pro-administration.
Yeah.
And over the Class 3 seat, we have Ralph Izard, also listed as pro-administration.
Just hearing that label tells you how new everything was.
Yeah, it sounds so formal.
Well, there were no established formal political parties yet. The entire political apparatus was essentially categorized by whether you supported George Washington's administration or opposed it. It was incredibly binary.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the early days of this list are incredibly chaotic.
Oh, completely.
When you scroll through the table for the first few decades, it is not a list of people serving long, predictable 6-year terms. It's a barrage of rapid-fire turnover. People are constantly stepping down, moving around, passing away.
You have to remember the physical realities of travel, health, and just the sheer experimental nature of the federal government made serving in the Senate a very different job back then.
You can see it right here in the data. In the late 1790s, John Hunter gets elected to finish a term, and then he just resigns.
Right.
A few years later, Charles Pinckney is elected, serves a couple of years, and then the notes say he resigns to become the U.S. Minister to Spain.
Which was a massive deal at the time.
And then you have John E. Calhoun, who was elected in 1800, but tragically dies in office by October 1802. It just feels like a high-stakes game of musical chairs.
What's fascinating here is how this constant turnover connects to the broader picture of a young nation. We see a state and a country desperately trying to figure out its political identity. Look at how the party labels morph in the source material during this early era. You go from pro-administration and anti-administration to Federalist, then to Democratic Republican, and later to Jacksonian.
The visual of this list is striking because the text in that party column keeps changing colors and names as the factions battle for dominance.
It was a highly experimental phase. The country was testing out different ideological vehicles to see what could actually govern a rapidly expanding territory.
And then we hit the 1830s, and a completely unique party label pops up in the source materials.
Yes.
It's a highly specific anomaly that you do not see in modern politics. We see John C. Calhoun and Stephen Decatur Miller listed under parties simply called the Nullifier Party.
Right.
What exactly is a nullifier in this context?
This is a perfect example of a local ideological crisis bleeding into the federal structure. The Nullifier Party was built around the belief that a state had the right to nullify or invalidate any federal law that the state deemed unconstitutional.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, specifically, in this case, they were fighting federal tariffs that were hurting the Southern economy. Seeing that word right there in the official Senate list is a glaring warning sign of the regional tensions that were beginning to boil over.
And what really stands out is watching John C. Calhoun's timeline in the Class 2 seat. He is elected as a nullifier to finish a term in 1832. But by the time we get to his later terms, ending up around 1845, his party label in the table has transitioned back to Democratic.
That transition from nullifier back to Democrat is the physical proof on the page that regional tensions were being temporarily swallowed back up by the main party apparatus.
Like a temporary Band-Aid.
Exactly. It shows the reactive nature of these splinter factions, but also the deep, unresolved fractures that were just going to keep widening as the century progressed.
Which brings us right into the 1850s, where the instability on this list reaches a fever pitch.
It really does.
We are looking at the years leading right up to the Civil War. And the desks just cannot stay filled. You have figures like Andrew Butler dying in office in 1857. Then Josiah Evans dies in office in 1858. It leads to this frantic scramble of appointments and special elections.
The physical toll on the senators almost mirrors the institutional toll on the country. The stress on the political system was immense, and you can literally count the number of short-term appointments required just to keep South Carolina represented.
And then the source material delivers a massive dramatic turn. We get to James Chestnut Jr.
Yes.
He's a Democrat who was elected to finish out Josiah Evans' term. The notes in the electoral history column are incredibly stark. It states that he withdrew and was later officially expelled from the Senate for his support of the Confederacy.
Right.
This happens in November 1860. The phrasing there caught my eye: withdrew and then expelled. What is the actual difference between those two actions?
That is a crucial distinction. Withdrawal is essentially senators saying, I quit. I am walking away from this body. But expulsion is entirely different. Expulsion is the United States Senate utilizing its supreme constitutional authority to officially kick someone out. It requires a 2/3 majority vote.
So Chestnut walks away, but the Senate officially slams the door behind him.
Yes, and this raises an important question about what happens to the machinery of government when the very fabric of the nation is tearing. The expulsion of a sitting senator is an incredibly rare and extreme constitutional mechanism. Chestnut's withdrawal and subsequent expulsion is the exact moment the political tether snaps.
And it creates the most striking visual in the entire Wikipedia list.
It really is.
If you are scrolling through this chronological table, suddenly there's just a massive multi-year blank space across both the Class 2 and Class 3 seats. The rows literally just stop.
It is chilling to see it represented as just empty table cells. In July 1861, South Carolina Senate seats were officially declared vacant due to secession. For 7 entire years, through the entirety of the Civil War and the early years of Reconstruction, those 2 desks in the United States Senate chamber just sat empty.
No representation, no participation. Just a void from July 1861 until July 1868. When you look at the dates, it forces you to pause. Think about the sheer weight of that missing time, the laws passed, the history made, while a huge portion of the country simply wasn't at the table.
It is a visual representation of a broken constitutional system. The American experiment was essentially paused for that region.
But eventually, the gap ends. The seats are filled again in July 1868, and we enter a brief, entirely new era for the state.
We do.
The immediate aftermath of the Civil War brings a complete reversal of the previous political order in South Carolina. For a brief window, from 1868 into the 1870s, the seats are held by the Republican Party.
This is the Reconstruction era. The political enfranchisement of newly freed black citizens and the temporary disenfranchisement of former Confederates completely flipped the electoral math.
We see Thomas J. Robertson step in to fill the vacant Class II term. And over in Class III, Frederick A. Sawyer and later John J. Patterson hold the seat. It's a very specific, defined block of Republican control right middle of the 19th century.
But the pendulum swings back incredibly hard. By the late 1870s, federal troops are withdrawn, the era of Reconstruction wanes, and the Democratic Party regains total, absolute control of the state's politics.
Looking at the table, starting with Matthew Butler in the Class II seat in 1877 and Wade Hampton III in the Class III seat in 1879, we see the beginning of an unbroken streak.
A massive streak.
The list just turns into a solid wall of the word Democratic, row after row. And this monopoly would last for nearly a century.
Think about the mathematical improbability of that. A single political party holding on to both Senate seats in a state for nearly 100 years without a single break. It speaks to the absolute ideological consolidation of the Solid South during that period.
Nearly a century of just one column color. But even within that incredibly stable one-party era, there are some absolutely fascinating exits from the Senate that are source details. For instance, I'm looking at the entry for James F. Burns in the 1930s.
Burns is a very interesting case study in political career trajectories.
Right, because he's elected in 1930, easily reelected in 1932, and then reelected again in 1938. He is cruising along, building power. But then in July 1941, the notes say he resigns his seat. And he does not resign because of a scandal or poor health. He leaves the legislative branch entirely to join a completely different branch of government. He becomes a justice of the U.S. Supreme Court.
It is a profound reminder that the Senate, while a pinnacle for many politicians, is sometimes viewed as a stepping stone to other forms of immense national influence. Moving from a partisan legislative body to the supposedly nonpartisan highest court in the land is a massive leap.
But there is another exit in the 1950s that caught my attention. Looking at the table here, there is a guy named Charles E. Daniel.
Oh, this is a great story.
He is appointed in September 1954 to finish out the term of Burnett R. Maybank, who had passed away. So Daniel is only going to be there for a few months. But according to the source material, he explicitly resigns a few days early on December 23, 1954. Why on earth would someone give up even a week of being a U.S. senator?
It was a brilliant, highly calculated piece of insider political maneuvering. He did it to grant a massive institutional advantage to his successor, Strom Thurmond.
How does resigning a few days early help the next guy?
Imagine waiting in line for a highly anticipated blockbuster movie.
Yep.
Daniel essentially held a spot at the very front of the line. Right before the theater doors opened, he stepped aside and let Strom Thurmond take his exact spot, pushing Thurmond ahead of all the other people who were just arriving at the theater.
Wow.
In the Senate, power is heavily dictated by seniority. By resigning early, Daniel allowed Thurmond to be appointed to the seat right before the new term officially started. Gaining even a few days of seniority over the incoming freshman class of senators gave Thurmond a preferential rank for committee assignments and leadership roles.
That is wild, just a pure calculated seniority hack. You are literally exploiting the procedural rules of the chamber to benefit your state's long-term influence.
And it perfectly sets the stage for what we can call the era of the modern titans. Up until this point, we saw a lot of turnover, a lot of partial terms, and musical chairs. But as we move into the mid-20th century, there is a drastic shift in the data. We enter an era where senators serve for decades at a time.
You see it vividly in the tenure lengths. Olin D. Johnston held his seat from 1945 all the way to 1965. And then you have Fritz Hollings, who took office in 1966 and held that seat until 2005.
That's incredible.
That is nearly 40 years for Hollings alone. Think about how many presidential administrations he worked with over 4 decades.
It fundamentally changes how a state wields power in Washington. When voters return the same figures to the Capitol term after term, those representatives spend decades building committee chairmanships and deep legislative relationships. The state's influence compounds over time.
But no one embodies this phenomenon more than the successor to that seniority hack we just discussed, Strom Thurmond. Thurmond's timeline in this Wikipedia list is legendary. He's the state's longest-serving senator by a mile. He serves from 1954 to 1956, and then from 1956 all the way to 2003. But wait, why is there a break in 1956? He is sitting in the United States Senate, and the table shows he just resigns in April 1956.
It is a truly wild piece of electoral history. Thurmond was originally elected as a write-in candidate in 1954, which in itself is incredibly rare.
Yeah, you don't see that often.
But he had made a campaign pledge that he would resign prior to the 1956 primary. He wanted the voters to have a standard open election for the seat rather than him relying on the massive advantage of incumbency he gained from his write-in victory.
Okay, let's unpack this. He voluntarily gives up one of the most powerful positions in the world to fulfill a campaign promise, runs for the exact same seat he just vacated, wins, and is elected again in November 1956 to finish his own term.
Yes,
That is a level of confidence in your political base that is almost hard to comprehend today.
it is highly unusual. But it solidified his mandate in a way few other politicians could claim. He proved he didn't need a technicality to hold the seat. However, the most consequential moment in Thurmond's tenure is not his resignation.
No, it is not. Here's where it gets really interesting. If you look closely at the table for Thurmond, there is a specific date noted in the text, September 16, 1964. On that exact day, the column listing his political party shifts from Democratic to Republican. After almost a century of a solid blue wall on this table, we get a sudden shift.
And that single date on this Wikipedia page serves as a tangible marker for one of the most significant shifts in American political history. Thurmond changing his party affiliation on September 16, 1964, was the canary in the coal mine for the broader political realignment of the American South.
The century-long Democratic stronghold we talked about earlier was fracturing.
Precisely. It was fracturing over civil rights and the role of the federal government. Thurmond's switch signaled a sea change that would eventually turn the South solidly Republican in federal elections over the coming decades. The data on the page captures the exact moment the tectonic plates shifted.
It is amazing how much weight one date in a spreadsheet can hold. And that shift brings us all the way to the current delegation.
It does.
Today is Wednesday, March 4, 2026. The two seats are currently held by Republicans. In the Class 2 seat, we have Lindsey Graham, who has been serving since 2003. He actually replaced Strom Thurmond when Thurmond finally retired.
And in the Class 3 seat, we have Tim Scott, who was appointed to the seat and has been serving since 2013. But if we look at the electoral history notes for Senator Scott, there's a crucial detail regarding the future.
Yes, the source notes that Tim Scott, who was just reelected a few years ago in 2022, has stated that he is retiring at the end of his current term.
Which means the Class 3 seat will be entirely open in the 2028 election. For the first time in over a decade, there will be a new occupant in that role. Another historical shift is officially on the horizon. The list is going to get a brand new entry, and the cycle continues.
It never stops moving. Looking back at this journey, we just tracked 2 single Senate seats in one state. But doing so took us through the chaotic birth of political parties, the literal tearing apart of the nation resulting in years of empty desks, the clever insider political favors to manipulate seniority, and the massive ideological realignments that reshaped the entire map.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it shows us that institutions are just vessels. The Senate itself is just a room with desks. It is the people occupying them, and fundamentally, the changing values and anxieties of the voters who put them there that actually shape history. The data on the page is just the residue of human choice.
So what does this all mean for you right now? We've spent all this time looking at party labels in the source material, Democrat, Republican, Nullifier, Federalist. I want to leave you with a thought to ponder on your own. What happens to these historical tables if the two-party system fractures?
Oh, that's interesting.
Imagine a historian looking at a future Wikipedia page 100 years from now where the party column suddenly fractures into 4, 5, or 6 different independent labels. How would the machinery of the Senate even function if we return to the ideological chaos of the 1790s?
That is a profound question to walk away with. The structure of the Senate relies on majority building. If the labels splinter entirely, the entire mechanical rhythm we've discussed would be tested in unprecedented ways.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We love taking these documents and bringing the history inside them to the surface with you. Until next time, keep looking past the surface of the things you read. Have a wonderful day.